watching closely.
What's the secret, Max?
You just gotta find something you love to do and then do it for the rest of your life.
I don't want to be a product of my environment. I want my environment to be a product of me.
Hello, and welcome to The Establishing Shot, a podcast where we do deep dives into directors and their filmographies. I am your host, Eli Price, and we are here on episode 84 of the podcast, continuing our series covering Spielberg. We're kind of in the middle portion of his career with Catch Me If You Can today, a crowd pleaser, if you will. And I have a first-time guest joining me today, Abby Olcese. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Abby is, she has her 9-to-5 job, but what we really have her on here for is for her, just love for film. And she does some writing in film for, is it multiple publications that you've done writing for?
Yeah, I freelance a lot, so I'm a regular contributor at Think Christian and Sojourners. Those are places that I write for a lot. In fact, I think you had Joe George on here a few weeks ago, and he's a good friend of mine from both places.
Oh, great, yeah.
And we're all a fun little network over there. And
Zachary Lee too, I think.
Zachary Lee as well.
Yeah.
Which I don't want to take too much credit, but I may or may not be the reason that they ended up writing for Sojourners, and in Zachary's case, interning with them for a year. So that might be my fault. And I also am the film editor for The Pitch, which is an alt weekly here in Kansas City.
Okay, great. Very cool. And so you obviously enjoy writing about film, and we are going to have you on for the a future episode. I'm not sure if it'll be next week, because I'll probably try to do like some. This will be releasing around the Oscars, so I might do like an Oscars preview show for next week. But
sure.
But probably the week, one of the upcoming weeks, we'll have you on for an interview and talk more about your love of film and your writing of film, which we'll be covering a book that has come out pretty recently, right? Back in November, October, somewhere in there?
October, I had a book come out in October called Films for All Seasons that is an extension of a series that I wrote for Think Christian, which is it's a guide for movies to watch through the church liturgical season. So I see you have a hard copy there. That makes me happy.
I have a hard copy.
Hey!
I threw it on the Amazon wish list that I give my family for Christmas. And it got the luck of the draw. So
that's awesome.
So you can thank I guess my in-laws, I think, got it for me. So you can thank them for the physical copy shout out on the video. If you're watching, you can see it there. But I'll make sure to put a link to that in the show notes where people can find it, and you like Amazon and all the usual places you can find. We'll dig more into what that's all about in that future episode. But for now, we're going to talk Spielberg. And I always like to hear people's stories of when they first came across directors. So do you happen to remember your first encounter with Steven Spielberg?
Yeah, that's a heck of a question. I think my earliest Spielberg memory is probably Jurassic Park. So I was about 5 when that movie came out, and so like right at the like kind of questionably right age for it, where like you're excited by dinosaurs, but like maybe not so much like death and dismemberment. So I think we watched it. I watched it with my parents when I was about 7, and it made a huge impression. It remains one of my favorite movies. My mom and I just here locally went to the Kansas City Symphony doing a live score performance of it alongside the film, which was so much fun.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my entry point. I also, watched E.T. as a kid and cried a lot. It still makes me cry to this day.
Yes.
And this like kind of era of Spielberg that we're covering now, I would have been like a 8th grade high school freshman when Minority Report and Catch Me If You Can came out, because it was the same year, which is wild. And so that was kind of a big thing too, was just my memory of that growing up, was like that was sort of hitting around the time that I was really starting to get into film. So, like a lot of people, I think Spielberg's always been there at different stages in my life, as well as he has different eras in his career.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it's funny because like I was kind of like in the same. So I think you're maybe like a few years older than me. So like I would have been Catch Me If You Can, Minority Report. I would have been like just starting middle school. So I was kind of like on the cusp of, depending on your parents, what they let you watch.
Yes.
Those were like maybe a little old for like what my parents were willing to let me watch. So I kind of like came in a little bit later with watching them, but I did grow up seeing Jurassic Park and E.T. So we do have that sort of common intro there.
Yeah. I do have I have a good story about Jaws. I used to babysit a couple of boys whose dad was a huge Star Wars and like Ghostbusters and early Spielberg fan. And they were, I think, maybe about 7, and I was babysitting them, and they were watching Jaws on TV. And I was like kind of not sure if they should be, if they were like old enough to really be watching it. But it was clear, I think, that they had seen it at least once before, because they were pointing out stuff. And my favorite bit was that around the scene where they go to Quint's house for the first time, and he's like, got like shark jaws like boiling on a stove in his house. One of the little boys turns to me and he goes, "He does that because it looks cool." And I was like, "Yeah, it does. You're right." And he said, "And because it smells good." And I was like, "It does not." I can guarantee you that house smells horrible.
Yes.
So I have a lot of positive memories associated with Spielberg movies, as I'm sure a lot of people do.
Yeah, it's I think that is the great thing about him, is out of like the directors, which this is just the 3rd director I've covered, but he's kind of like a multi-generational director. Like I covered Wes Anderson and Christopher Nolan, who's kind of like the Spielberg of today, but in a way, not that they make the same movies, but like how they kind of fit in pop culture is similar, I think.
I'd say, like impact and scale wise, you're probably not far off. Yeah.
Yeah. But Spielberg just has a further like generational reach, I think. Like, not that, like, I think old people like going to see Christopher Nolan movies too, but it's not like this, I know like older people that are like into like seeing the newest Christopher Nolan, but it's not the same as Spielberg. He has that like such a huge,
we're like, you can take the entire family to see Hook, and every generation is probably going to enjoy it for different reasons, but they all will like it. It's I think you're right on there. It's a different kind of a thing.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, let's jump into Catch Me If You Can, because this is a very interesting movie. It's kind of I guess it's kind of like coming off of a little bit of a sci-fi run for Spielberg. So he's kind of getting back into his, I don't know, he's really like, he's had like a couple of historical films and then a couple of sci-fi films, and this is like getting in a way back to his roots with kind of like an adventure it's an adventure in a sense. It's kind of fast paced. It's getting a little bit back to his roots, but maybe just a little bit more mature, I guess.
Yeah. And it's interesting actually to have watched this after seeing The Fabelmans, because I feel like if you were to watch these two, I mean, it would be a really long double feature, but if you were to double feature these movies, I think they would be in conversation in a really interesting way.
Yes.
Which, like, I don't think I had seen this movie until since the first time I watched it in like maybe high school with my parents. Until like for this podcast, I hadn't seen it in years. And so like watching it a year or so after having seen The Fablemans, I was like pointing to certain things and going, I see that, I see that, I see that. That's carried over in some kind of interesting, cool, maybe semi-autobiographical ways that I'm curious to see how he kind of hooked into the story personally there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the kind of personal aspect of it is like all over this for sure. But yeah, let's go to the beginning because this started with the actual Frank Abagnale Jr. Based on a true story, or true-ish, as we'll probably talk about at some point. This I've tried to like listen to audiobooks of all the books that these movies are adapted from, because he does a lot of adaptations, Spielberg. I did not get to this one, unfortunately, but I'm sure it would be a very interesting read. But Abagnale did actually appear on a game show called To Tell the Truth, which the movie starts with as kind of I guess it's kind of a framing device. It kind of like starts there and then doesn't ever like.
Yeah. If I have a criticism,
again.
It's that I would have liked to have seen that more as like a consistent framing device. I don't know. I'm a person who likes patterns and structure a lot. And so when you see something like that at the beginning, it's kind of annoying to me if it doesn't follow through, but it is kind of a cool hook into the story.
It is. And it's kind of like, hey, this actually happened. I guess we got to include the movie with this. But it is like, I was thinking about that, like, oh, it never like goes back to that or mentions it again. It's just like,
And at what point in his own story is this happening? Is this when he's working at the FBI for Carl Hanratty? Is it after?
Yeah.
Like,
it's in 1977 is when he was on the show. So he appeared on the show. He had like he appeared on some talk shows after that. And then he published his autobiography in 1980. So, which he was 28 years old at the time. So I would imagine,
shocking to me.
Yeah, I would imagine he was still working with the FBI at that point. Because it was what, 69, I guess, when he finally made it back to America in custody, I think, if I'm remembering.
1969.
I'm trying to like picture the title cards showing like Christmas Eve 1969, you know.
I think that's right.
But yeah, so he in 1980, so you know, a kind of a decade after he's been in, I guess, I don't know what you would call it, on parole with the FBI. He does this autobiography with the help of a journalist named Stan Redding. And yeah, I mean, it seems like as soon as it was published, people were trying to get adaptation rights. It was passed around a lot. I read that at one point, even Dustin Hoffman was rumored to be playing Frank Abagnale Jr. So which would have been interesting. But yeah, so late 90s, Jeff Nathanson, who was a screenwriter, wrote Twister and Speed 2. Those are probably...
We'll only talk about Twister. That's the only one worth mentioning.
I have not seen Speed 2, but I can only imagine.
I've been told repeatedly not to bother with it, unfortunately.
But Twister's good, so he's a good screenwriter as far as maybe the director messed up Speed 2, who knows. But he sees a recording of Abagnale and goes directly to Brian Kemp, who is a producer and at that time held the rights to this story. So Brian Kemp and him take it to DreamWorks. DreamWorks is like, yeah, we're interested. And believe it or not, David Fincher was one of the early directors attached to this film. But he decides to focus on Panic Room, which also came out in 2002. So I don't know. That's still a blind spot for me. So I don't know if I'm like, that was a good... Have you seen Panic Room?
I have not, but I've heard really
I've
good
heard pretty
things.
good- yeah, I've heard good
I've
things.
been meaning to check it out again, so I'm sure it's probably really solid.
Yeah.
If nothing else, I'd like to see baby Kristen Stewart kind of lighting up
Yeah.
the screen a bit. So
Yeah. Yeah, I'll get to that. I mean, I like to be a completist if I can, and Fincher's definitely a tackleable director as far as that goes. So I'll make it to Panic Room at some point. But so Fincher drops out, and then Leonardo DiCaprio hears about it. He reads the autobiography while he's on the set of Gangs of New York, which, being a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, as you can imagine, is a very long shoot. And yeah,
Scorsese, not PTA.
Oh, I don't know why I said PTA. What movie am I thinking of? Why did I say? I don't know. But yeah, Scorsese.
PTA's Gangs of New York I would watch, but
I would too.
Yeah.
You know what I was thinking? I was thinking of I was just doing like a kind of like 8 degrees of separation, and I was wow. Yeah, I was putting I was picturing Phantom Thread.
Okay. Oh yeah, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Daniel Day-Lewis, and then picturing him in Gangs of New York, and that's what my mind did. So there's no way to explain. There's no logic to that. It just happened. But yeah, I am ashamed because Scorsese's like, if I had to pick a favorite director, it would be Scorsese. So now I'm ashamed.
As an Italian American, I feel it is my duty to step in and correct where I can.
I greatly appreciate it. Yeah. I deserve to be reprimanded for that. But yeah, so he's on the set of Gangs of New York with Scorsese. It's a long shoot. So he reads the autobiography and he's like, I would like to be a part of this movie. During this time, they get Gore Verbinski, who directed at least the first Pirates movie. Does he direct? I think he directed.
I think
multiple.
He directed all of them, or at least the first 3.
The first 3, I think. Yeah. But yeah, they get a deal going with him. They have Leo on board, and James Gandolfini is playing the FBI agent at this point. But Gangs of New York is still shooting, so it gets postponed. And in the meantime, Verbinski leaves. They try some other guys. Hallstrom, who directed Chocolat, Milos Forman, who directed Amadeus, Cameron Crowe even was attached at one point. Just nobody's working out. So
yeah, it's so interesting to think of like. I can envision what those movies would be like with those directors attached. And like, I don't hate any version of those.
Right.
But I think, I do think that it's interesting that Spielberg comes on and has such a personal take on it, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where like, maybe it would be cool to get multiple versions of this because it's such a good story and such interesting characters that it would be interesting to see what different directors like would pull from the story and focus on, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Spielberg at this time had done a similar thing with Amistad. But he's just like, well, nobody's getting this made, so I'm going to jump on and take it over. So he does. Yeah. He steps in to direct. He was actually working on an adaptation of Arthur Golden's novel Memoirs of a Geisha at the time and passed that on to Rob Marshall. And yeah, he was really looking to do something lighter after 4 pretty heavy movies in a row. And so, yeah, I mean, this sci-fi run, they're still like pretty heavy thematically, even though they're fun sci-fi movies. So I also read that he really wanted to direct Meet the Parents in 1999. But Kate Capshaw vetoed it because he was supposed to be on a sabbatical.
Okay.
So
good for her. Good job, Kate.
Kept him in line of like, hey, remember you're supposed to be taking your sabbatical, no working. So yeah, which I think Spielberg himself would even say like that Kate was like a savior for him as far as like his workaholism. So, but yeah, so yeah, this portrait of America and the life of Abagnale really spoke to him. And yeah, he took it on. So the way Spielberg talks about it is he says he approached it as like a nostalgic trip back to like the pop art and charm of the 60s. And also like 60s movies about swindlers and spy comedies like The Flim Flam Man, which I have not seen, but is really fun to say.
Yeah, it is. It's Irvin Kershner's a good director, so yeah, I'm sure it's great.
Yeah. But yeah, so he's kind of like opportunity to recreate the America of his teens, which, you know, what director wouldn't want to do that? Because your teens are a very like exciting time in your life. For most people, not for, I don't want to speak in generalities, but most people, like, that's kind of the culture that like sticks around your teens and 20s that kind of influences you the most. So yeah, he really wanted to like focus in on family and values and booming capitalism, but also like with, I guess, like that undertone of knowing that it would all come crashing down. And so, yeah, so Nathanson is still on board as the writer, and he also talks about influences being found in The Sting and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, movies that he loved, and just kind of like the way he as the screenwriter looked at it was he was trying his best to not write Abagnale as a criminal, but as this kind of like smart and misguided kid, which comes across on screen big time.
Yeah, I think it works very well.
But yeah, they really they really like had to tweak the script a lot because it was very it's very episodic, as I would imagine that the autobiography is episodic, because that's generally how autobiographies are written. Here's this story about my life, here's this story, and so on. So yeah, honestly, like thinking about it in that way, it's actually like a pretty impressive script to get a through line through the movie that ties it all together.
Yeah. It's, I think it could very easily have been like a and then kind of movie, instead of it being as kind of thematically rich as it is. So yeah, it's the fact that it covers such a wide span of time. I think it does a pretty good job of making you really kind of watch the growth and decay and then regrowth of this person.
Yes. Yeah. And it's also good that Spielberg had someone else writing it, because he notoriously, and admittedly himself, usually says, I need good writers, because I have found myself not to be a great writer.
Well, it's good to know his strengths. I think it's really cool that he's able to see his own interests and his own kind of passions in projects that I'm sure he's working in collaboration with the people that are writing the scripts, but like to be able to find himself in somebody else's work, I think is a real talent, I think, as a filmmaker.
Yeah. And he's as far as like the story it goes, he's like the visionary usually. And so like he's got tons of ideas, and he just like throws them. It seems like he just like throws them all at his writers, and they just kind of take what makes most sense and sticks and make something out of it.
That's not too terribly different from how certain forms of marketing work, honestly. I get
that. Yeah. I mean, like, if you watch these behind the scenes, some of these like conversations of Spielberg with his team, and he just like, it's like before he even gets done with one idea, he's like, oh, and what about we could do this? And it's like, they're writing stuff down, and they're like, oh, we've got to like make something out of all these ideas. And but when it comes to like on set, it's kind of like the opposite. Like, yes, he's a visionary, but he's like very detailed. He knows exactly where to put the camera. He has like a very specific vision. So it's interesting to see like those two sides of him, like being like the throw everything at the wall ideas guy in the like the pre-production stuff. But then once you're on set, he's like tuned in.
yeah, once you've got the structure and you know where you're going, which
Yeah.
I get that. I sometimes work a little bit similarly. But
Yeah.
I think it's great. Like, I think he works with Tony Kushner a lot these days, and I feel like maybe he's found somebody who really kind of fits that mold really well for how he likes to work.
Yeah. Yeah, probably so.
Hi. Quick reminder that you, yes, you, can be a huge help to the production of this show. If you visit establishingshotpod.com/donate, you'll find out how to join the Establishing Shot family through some giving tiers starting as low as $5 a month. You heard that right, only $5 a month. And not only will you be helping me keep the show going, but you'll also get some perks yourself, like early and ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, access to a Discord server where we can chat it up about the show and movies in general, and more. Might even let you choose a movie for me to review for the show. Check out that link in the show notes to learn more. Back to the show.
He does assemble a crew made up of some new faces, but mostly like his go-tos. Janusz Kaminski obviously is kind of from Schindler's List on is his guy. Michael Kahn, his tried and true editor. John Williams, of course, which we'll talk about. We'll try to get to the score at some point, because this is a really fun John Williams score.
It's great. Yeah,
it stands out big time.
Yeah.
Because one of my complaints, I say complaints, it's not a real complaint. It's just kind of like a slight critique where I'm still like bowing down to the great John Williams while saying it.
Sure.
Is sometimes his scores kind of like just kind of take from each other. Like they can all bleed together. You know, there's the standout themes that he writes, but a lot of his scores, the swelling emotions are very similar.
Yeah.
And so, but then every once in a while he'll do a movie like this, which is just so different. And it's like, you have such range with what you can do. Why
it's a real departure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, I feel like I can really see people talk about Michael Giacchino as kind of the heir apparent to John Williams. And I feel like in moments like this, that's where it stands out for me, where I can point to it and go, okay, yes, I can hear this in like The Incredibles. I can hear this in certain other places.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a really cool, it's a different kind of score than we're used to seeing from him. And it sounds great here.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and follow that money trail. Cause what's interesting is it's actually going back to his roots. He did a lot of jazz in the 50s and 60s before he really got into writing movie scores. He was doing, he was doing that was the main thing he was doing, was writing for jazz and playing jazz and stuff. And so he's really like getting to go back to his roots in a similar time period, really, that the movie's set. So seeing him in like the making of stuff, talk about it, you can just tell like he's really lit up.
That's
even
so cool.
more so than like maybe even like better scores that he's done, talking about those very like seriously and like this is what we did. But he like looks excited for this one, which was fun to see.
Yeah, like it's an opportunity to kind of, I don't know, revisit stuff that you enjoy doing but haven't gotten to do in a while. Like it's an invitation to play almost.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I would imagine if you're like somebody who's known for a certain kind of thing and then somebody asks you to do something that you know you like and nobody asks you to do ever, like, yeah, I would be excited.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And it really does, like this John Williams score brings like a totally different like swagger to the movie than it would have if it was like his typical fare for a movie score.
I think it does a great job of like setting the atmosphere and the pace, and it works really, really well with the production design.
Yes.
Which like, yeah, there's so much going on with like the TWA terminal and like all of the whole obsession with like airlines and pilots and stewardesses. Like it fits the style very, very well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There is like, still does have like a couple of themes that sound more like traditional John Williams. Like there's this like very emotional, like magical emotional sounding theme whenever like Abagnale Jr. is like having a emotional moment that like pops up that I'm like, there's like the John Williams we usually hear. And so that it kind of stands out because it's like, oh, that's like typical John Williams, and then it jumps back into the like really groovy jazz music.
It's nice that he's able to pick it up and put it down as needed, but I get that.
Absolutely. Other crew, you mentioned the production design, so you have Sarah Knowles doing the art direction, Janine Opawal, I guess is how you pronounce her name, doing the production design, Kim Sant'Antonio doing hair, and then Mary Zofre is doing costumes, which she's actually out of that group probably the most notable. She's had 3 Oscar nominations for costumes, and the costuming is really great in this movie. So
it is. It's really solid.
But it's really all that whole crew, like huge props to that design crew, because this movie it's so like, it's just interesting to watch. As far as all that goes.
It's, I mean, especially with I think maybe the obsession with mid-century design was maybe starting a little bit in the early 2000s, but like we're still kind of pre-Mad Men by a few years here. And so like by the time that hits, and we're like, I think around now, maybe that's starting to fade a little bit, but I am still obsessed with that stuff. So like seeing the attention to detail there, and just like the design porn on screen where you're like, oh man, like I want to like live, feel, like eat this stuff that I'm seeing. Like it's really cool.
Oh man. It's great. And also like, I love the colors, but also like, man, are some of them hideous.
I know. Oh yeah. Like I think there's that apartment that he lives in that has like, it has like the avocado green like carpet and stuff. And like there are people outside using like tanning timers, and he's like on the phone, and then somebody's like, hey, so and so fell into the conversation pit, and I was just like, this is just like signifier after signifier after signifier. Just like, how much more can you tell us that this is the 60s, and you know, nobody's caring about skin
it's real to real,
or real, that's right, the real to real machine. It's almost too much, but like I also don't mind it at the same time.
Oh man, it's great. Maybe that was like, Spielberg was like, I really want to shout out my designers for this scene, so let's throw it all in here.
Or like, remember this. It just feels like at the ultimate nostalgia moment.
That might have been one of those Spielberg like, oh, remember this, we can throw that in there. Oh, remember this.
You guys remember conversation pits? Yes, I do. We need to bring them back. I get it.
Nathanson, can you get that in the script?
That's right. Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I'll get it in there. Really good crews. The cast. Let's talk a little bit about the cast. Because this is a very interesting, very fun cast to talk about. So obviously Leonardo DiCaprio plays Frank Abagnale Jr., not Abagnale. Abagnale, and he does Titanic, and then he kind of disappears for a bit, which is interesting. I don't know. I guess that doesn't happen as often today, of these like young actors doing such a big movie and then disappearing, because it seems like, I don't know, the MCU or somebody will snatch them up and throw them in their movie.
You get the golden handcuffs put on you, and then you're never free again. But
but that's what happened to him. He kind of disappeared. He was 26 at this time, and so he was obviously filming for Gangs of New York, but it hadn't come out when they started this movie. So he kind of came right off of Gangs of New York onto this movie before. It was probably, I think Gangs of New York was also 2002. So
that sounds
feels
about
like
right.
so. So I think they were maybe just like wrapping up production on this maybe when it came out. So that was he kind of, that was a well-seen movie generally, and so he kind of like came back on the scene a little bit with that, I guess. But that and this in the same year is probably like pretty big for him, like
Yeah,
showing
that'll
back
put you
up,
on the
you
map.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, so he really like, and really like too, this year begins Leo's run of like jumping around to all the big directors. So he like knocks out Scorsese and Spielberg in one year, and really like from here on, like he does some Tarantino, he does, you know, Inarritu with Revenant, and like he really like mostly tries to like, oh, I'm just gonna work with the best directors, which honestly is like a really smart career move for a big actor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, he did a lot of work for this movie. He spent 3 days with the real Abagnale Jr. He like recorded him and took notes. And yeah, I wrote down this quote from Leo because I thought it was funny. He said, "You don't think he would steal a postage stamp? He looks as innocent as a school teacher. A lot of his way of seducing people was very unconscious." And so
It's funny. Yeah.
that was like one of the, I guess, like qualities he picked up on that he tried to like mimic in the movie.
Yeah.
Which
I get that.
Yeah, which you can definitely see, very like charismatic and like like not really
He's a person
like,
who seems like he makes friends easily.
yeah. And it comes across in the movie because you never, there's maybe a few moments, but usually there's not like this him thinking about like, oh, how am I going to get this person? It's just like he's thrown into a situation and it just comes out of him. That like very unconscious, like swindling and lying and, you know, pulling people in. So yeah. So yeah, Leo does some good prep with the real Frank Abagnale Jr. for this movie, which really I think comes through. Yeah, and really like a really great choice for this kid, because it had been a while since I had seen this, and I was surprised like how much he looks like a kid at the beginning of the movie.
Very much so. Yeah, he still looks very young.
Maybe even more so than in Titanic when he was younger. So
yeah. It's he plays that vulnerability really, really well.
Yeah, kind of the wide-eyedness and
and like you can see all the stuff that he picks up from Christopher Walken as his dad, like how he really worships him and respects him, and how his father's ways of kind of swindling people are like it's not dissimilar from that. Like he's not a bad guy. He just is who he is, and he's a natural charmer. So I think a lot of it is just like you see this kid who he only sees that as like the only form of success that a person can have.
Yeah,
that's his model. And so it's almost kind of charming to see him like first just trying it out and then like taking it even further, just like this is what he knows how to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting too because like this was a period where, you know, Spielberg is kind of reconciled with his father again. And so but like I guess that is one difference, is like Spielberg did not want to be like his father when he was growing up.
Right.
And in this movie, it's almost like him like reimagining, what if I did want to be like my father when I was a kid? Kind of in that reconciling period. But yeah,
or even I think like both sides of that relationship too, of like how wanting to be like somebody, but also recognizing that that person is on some level responsible for tearing your family apart.
Yeah.
Like it's both aspirational and really painful at the same time, which I could imagine, like, even if you were still mad at your father, like that would still be like a thing that would probably reside in your heart in some way.
Yeah. And I almost wonder too, like thinking about it right now, I'm almost wondering if there's a bit of his dad and his mom in that, in that character, because he always talks about how when he was growing up, his mom was less of a mom to them and more like of a like friend kind of companion. Like she would just kind of let them do what they wanted to do. And there's like that one scene there, his like last meeting with his father, where he's just like tell me to stop, like be a parent. And it's so I almost wonder if there's a bit of like his mom, like be a parent to me, like tell me not to do this thing that I'm doing, you know. So it's interesting how like those influence kind of like meld together, you know, to a degree in characters.
Yeah. And I do feel like I see a little bit of like, I mean, not knowing much about Spielberg's mother, but like I see a little bit of Mitzi Fableman and his mom in just like this kind of beautiful but unknowable person who also has an affair with his dad's best friend, but you know, and ends up marrying him. But you know, similarities. Who's to say?
Maybe she also was the rat that churned the
the mouse that turned the cream into butter. Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I mean, Christopher Walken, speaking of him, is really great in this movie. I think he's like one of the like unsung heroes of this cast. Like maybe not the first person you would think of to like, oh, this performance really holds it all together. But in a sense, like those moments where he shows back up throughout the movie, really like, it does a lot for the character development you need to see in Frank Abagnale Jr. In Leo's character. Just those interactions, like they progressively get more like he realizes more and more, I think, each time, like, oh, maybe I don't need to be my father, you know. Maybe I need to find a different father figure.
I think it's hard for me to think of an actor at that time or even now who would have struck that balance as well. Both that kind of like accessing that particular era of charm and kind of adult male successful businessman-ness that he carries throughout that. And while also having that same kind of like mysteriousness and like, I don't know if I can trust you.
Yeah, there's that like very unknowable quality to Christopher Walken, just like in, I don't think it's something he's putting on. I think it's just kind of natural to like,
the dude's kind of an enigma, I think. That like everything he does kind of surprises and confuses me at the same time.
Well, it's like he's in on the joke about himself, but not at the same time, but like totally sincere at the same time, which is.
And I feel like this is maybe around the time that we were, I mean, the 90s, maybe starting in the 90s, you start to see that a little bit more. But this was, I think, around the time that was sort of becoming like the thing that he was known for, was like being able to kind of play on his own image a little bit.
I'm trying to remember when the cowbell sketch was for SNL.
That might have been a little bit before this. I know that the Fatboy Slim music video is like a few years after this, or around the same time. But like that's kind of the trifecta in my brain.
Where he's like still totally himself and sincere, but also in on the joke. It's hard. It's a hard line to pull off. So
very much so. Yeah.
But he I think he's great in the movie. Spielberg cast him for one because Walter Parks, his co-producer, said he should go after him for this part. But Spielberg really loved him in The Deer Hunter, which is still a blind spot for me. So I need to see that.
It's a very different role.
Yes, very different movie from what I can tell. So
I mean, Heaven's Gate is too. So there's that.
Other cast, obviously, Tom Hanks. It's interesting. This is like in the middle, or it actually might be like the end of Tom Hanks' big run of like $100 million box office movies. He had like a run of like, I think it was like, I don't know, like 12 of 13 or something movies that made $100 million in the box office. And this was like towards the end of that.
I was trying to think. I think Castaway came out in 2000, and I'm trying to think of like where that fit into the kind of the narrative.
Yeah, there was like one movie, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, that like just bombed completely in the middle of that stretch. But yeah, he's just like hit after hit after hit. So it's basically like you hire Tom Hanks on and it's going to be a hit at this point still. So yeah, I mean, I think Tom Hanks is good in this movie. I question the need for an accent.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple bits that I think like the accent is pretty funny. Like the knock knock joke scene is like it feels like a very Boston thing, and so like to have that response to it is just like, yeah, all right. But
I'm just not sure this character like needs to be from Boston necessarily.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah,
it's just kind of like generic, you know, FBI guy that's, you know, serious about his job and you know, doesn't have a family to go home to at night. So like that's like the main thing about the character, not that he's from Boston. So I'm just like, you could have just done your normal voice, Tom.
Right.
Like, but I guess it was like for him like a fun challenge. I don't know.
Yeah. I want to say that this is like, at least in my brain, it's one of the first things that I remember seeing Tom Hanks in that kind of had the America's Dad vibe to it. Like maybe this is the start of his transition into that role. Just like the way that he is with Frank, both where he's just like he's you know chasing him down because he's a quarry, but also like the relationship that he develops with him is very it feels very parental in like the way that Frank wants his dad to be in a way. And so it's I feel like that's sort of where I start to see that kind of happening for him. I'm trying to remember. I think Polar Express is after this by not that much, and that is sort of I think kind of a seminal, even though I don't love that movie very much, I feel like that's sort of a seminal entry into the Tom Hanks America's Dad situation as well. Yeah,
I do not like to watch that movie. It's
uncanny and weird, but
it is.
Yeah,
it freaks me out.
Good. That's the correct response.
But, you know, I won't say anything more about that. But
that's fair.
But yeah, Tom Hanks is. So I'll say this about the accent. At least it's not whatever in the world he was doing in Elvis. So
sure. Oh yeah. Right. No,
so
yeah.
With that in mind, this is actually like pretty good. So
yeah. Could be worse. Could be the Snowman.
Yes. It's. Oh look, here and I have in my notes. I should have looked a little further down. It is the last in a streak of $100 million grossing films for Hanks. So
what's after
he follows. So, what was that?
What's after this? I was going to ask.
So right after this is The Lady Killers with the Coens.
Okay.
Which bombs, and then The Terminal is after that, which does pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think from this point on, it's kind of like he has like a lot of like up and downs, which is still sort of true to this day, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still think he's a pretty bankable star, but I'd say it's a little bit less consistent than it was in like the 90s through, you know, the early 2000s.
Yeah, he must have a deal with Apple or something, because I feel like he's been in the last, like, he's had like an Apple movie the last couple of years, it seems.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, including a couple that I've completely forgotten exist. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the ones that I don't even think really have much of a theatrical run. So it's like, who's watching this movie because who subscribes to Apple Plus other than people that like are talking and writing about film?
That's fair. Yeah, no. People who love Severance, duh.
Yeah. And Ted Lasso when that was going.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, so this character is interesting. It's like he does kind of fill in that this is the father I needed all along kind of thing in the movie. And the character's like kind of a composite of like several FBI agents in the real story. So yeah, it really, I think this part probably really needed a Tom Hanks to pull all of that off, because it could have easily been a very like, probably a more forgettable role without someone like Tom Hanks. But yeah.
I don't know if it becomes as like, I don't know, like a successful Broadway musical if you don't have like two dynamic actors and dynamic characters playing off each other the way that Hanks and DiCaprio do in this.
Yeah. And they have good chemistry. And one of the things about Tom Hanks is he's really good at like, he's one of those actors that like it seems like maybe he's not sticking to the script, but he is. He's just like really good at passing lines off as his own. And I think that's actually something that Spielberg said about him, is he's just really good at making his lines sound improvised or natural.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of a better thing to say about an actor, isn't it? Like they're so natural at delivering the stuff that you want them to deliver. Like that's it. That's what you want.
Exactly. And yeah, I guess Tom Hanks is one of the best at that, which I can see. He does have a way of like, just like saying his lines, but they feel like he's just a real, he's America's dad talking to us through the screen, we should definitely talk about some of the other cast as well. Natalie Bai plays Paula Abagnale, the mom. Spielberg really wanted a French actress, and he loved Bai in Truffaut's Day for Night, which I have not seen. I need to see more Truffaut. That's something I need to correct. I think I've only seen one. So definitely need to correct that.
And it's Truffaut is the director that he uses as an actor in Close Encounters. So he's got that Truffaut connection playing on a couple of levels.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, and really like they kind of are, Truffaut made us start with like a movie about a kid. So they kind of have that connection going too, of like tapping into that childlike quality.
Absolutely.
Which 400 Blows is very different than Spielberg's take on childhood, but
for sure. But I think the importance of like the whole coming of age thing, I think I can see that resonating.
So he loved her in that. So his good friend Brian De Palma is in France at the time, and so she actually auditioned with Brian De Palma and got the part through him, which is funny. It's like Spielberg's like, "Hey Brian, can you audition her?" And Brian's like, "Yeah, she'd be good."
I keep forgetting that they're friends. Like that's
very different.
I know that they were part of the same scene. It's just like I can't think of two artists with more different proclivities. Like, how are they friends?
There's a degree to which like Spielberg can get very like he can be very mischievous, which feels like Brian De Palma feels like he likes being like mischievous with the lines he likes to cross. It's just Spielberg doesn't cross the lines. He like goes up to them and he's like, he. Yeah. You know what I'm really wanting to do here. And Brian De Palma just like leaps over those lines. He
just pushes that envelope right off the cliff.
So I think Natalie Bai is fine. I don't really have anything to.
It's not a meaty enough role, I think, for it to really make as much of an impact, which I kind of wish it were a bit more, but I get it. It's
it's, well, Spielberg gets, he can, which is another Christopher Nolan connection, is he can get a bad rap for his female characters.
Sure. Yeah. I can see that.
Honestly, like I feel like it's more of like, well, do we like at this time it was still maybe more like, okay, we need more good female characters in these male directed movies. But now thankfully we're at the point where like, okay, like the males they can do their male characters and the females can like do their better focus, which I don't know. It's a whole thing. It's kind of like, I think
it's weird that it's a character.
He doesn't know it.
Yeah, it's weird that she's a character that you notice her more for her absence than you do for her presence. Which I mean, I feel like that's valuable to the film, but it doesn't necessarily give you a lot to work with as an actor.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. It's like, I don't know if I need Spielberg to make films with strong females, because I don't know that he would do it well. So
that's fair. Yeah.
But yeah, Amy Adams is great in the movie. I
Oh
really
yeah,
like
I
Amy
think
Adams.
she's lovely. Yeah.
This
And
was
this is I'm trying to remember where this is on the kind of her emergence.
it's like right there at the beginning. This was like
Okay.
this would probably almost without a doubt would be like her breakout.
Mm-hmm.
Probably being in this movie. She and I mean she
Okay,
was
yeah,
young.
because Junebug is like 3 years after this, and that's sort of the thing that gets her, like, I think she gets an Academy Award nomination from that. Like, she gets a lot of, like, that's sort of the thing that launches her. But this is maybe like the first notable thing that you see her in where you're like, oh, that's Amy Adams. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and so he picked, so she did her audition. She I love when actors do this, like to stand out in auditions. She did like teeth whitener trays to simulate braces, and did like no makeup, didn't wash her hair, had on like baggy clothes and flat shoes, and like all to be in character. And
Sure,
Spielberg
yeah.
loved her audition tape. And I think he picked, it was one of those things where like he picked like 8 or 9 tapes to show Leo, and Leo picked her out of those 8 or 9, which that's who
Wow.
Spielberg wanted to. It was one of those
Yeah.
like, I'm going to show you all these and see if we're on the same page. And
Sure, yeah.
kind of and worked out. So
yeah, that's awesome. And I think you kind of see like some of the same things that made her such like so winning in Junebug too, is like just sort of this wide-eyed innocence and like desire to want to, you know, be, I don't know, be loved, be appreciated, and like kind of to believe what she's being told, basically,
Yes.
for better or for
Yes.
worse.
Which is funny because we've almost come like full circle with her latest movie in Night Bitch, where she's once again I guess like with no makeup and baggy clothes, but this time being a very aware mom. So
in a different capacity. Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So yeah, it's I didn't make that connection until now. I hadn't seen this movie until recently. So
yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was fun. It wasn't like my favorite, but I thought it was good. And interesting, at least. Like, I just like it when directors make interesting movies. So
yeah, and I can tell this is a very personal one for Mariel Heller. So Martin Sheen, Roger Strong. He's just Martin Sheen, you know. Yeah, it's very weird to have like. I think I made a note of this, of just like, we're very Southern, we're very Lutheran, and we're very Irish, which is just like, those are 3 very different things.
Yes.
To have them all here.
Irish Lutherans? Is that a thing?
Lutheran Southerners. It's just, all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Martin Sheen is one of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, he's the great, like, I guess like well-to-do, but like very American dad.
Yeah.
I this movie, feel like, so
yeah, because West Wing is happening around now. And so like he literally is America's dad at this point.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah. They actually got him, they didn't think they were going to get him, but I think they only had him for 1 weekend.
Okay.
And they did all of his stuff in 1 weekend.
It's pretty efficient. Good job.
Yeah. Jennifer Garner plays Cheryl Ann. She got 1 scene, but it's a pretty big deal because it's Jennifer Garner, you know. Another kind of this movie has like 4 like very early performances from some pretty like well-known actresses now. Which is very interesting. But Spielberg kind of has done that through his career. He'll like find these young talents that go on, you know, to do bigger things in the future out of his movies. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, she was sort of known Garner at this point from Alias. But yeah, this is definitely like a step from TV to the big screen for her.
Yeah.
Two of the others would be Ellen Pompeo,
Mm-hmm.
who plays Marcy the stewardess, and Elizabeth Banks, who plays the bank teller.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's for young up and coming actresses, all of which Leo hooks up with.
Mm-hmm. In the movie or
course.
IRL? Yeah.
No,
in the movie.
I mean, I guess like I don't know that for sure in real life.
It does make me, I don't know, thinking about like the character's age at that point was very I don't know, especially because I think it feels like Jennifer Garner's character is like older by design, and it's just like what no. There's a part of me that feels very uncomfortable knowing that he was not like, he wasn't even 18. The character wasn't like Frank Abagnale isn't even 18 at this point, but it seems consensual, so I won't. And it's the 60s. I won't get too mad about it, but like there was a little bit of like a just ding in the back of my brain going,
Yeah. You know, I guess it is what it is a little bit.
I mean, it's from a book that he wrote. He claimed it all happened. So it's, which,
you know, it's kind of like, did you really though?
I mean, yeah, I know it's pretty highly debatable how much of it actually is true, but like, you know, in terms of fealty to the book, it's pretty close.
Yeah. So there's a few more names in there that I'm not going to get into because they're pretty minor parts. Frank Abagnale Jr., the real Frank Abagnale Jr., does play a French policeman in the movie, though.
Huh, no kidding.
So that's a fun fact. I guess he's one of those guys towards the end that arrests him that little French town or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello again. Do you know how you can really support the show for free in just a few minutes or less? That's right. Just leave a rating and review on Spotify and Apple, or wherever you listen that might allow for ratings and reviews. These really help the visibility of the podcast. In fact, just hit that pause button right now and drop the review right now. And then you can get back to the show. I'd greatly appreciate it. Okay. I trust that you went and left that rating and review now. Back to the show.
Okay, let's jump into production.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk a little bit about production, and then I know I only have you for a little while longer, so we'll do a little bit of production and then jump over to kind of like some themes and takeaways, because I definitely want to hear some of your thoughts as far as that goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I did want to talk with you about the opening titles, which are incredible.
Mm-hmm. Got that Saul Bass vibe going.
Yes, it's like, I think it's my favorite like beginning of a Spielberg movie. It's just like it's just fun to watch, and like the animation, the music, it's all the colors, it's all working together.
We talked about the John Williams music kind of establishing the pace and part of the style really well, and I feel like the titles are like kind of the other half of that, where like it just throws you in immediately, where you're like, this is the kind of movie we're watching, this is what it's going to look like, this is what it's going to feel like, this is what we're throwing back to. Again, like when you mentioned like all the other directors who were considered for this, and like I could see the kinds of movies that they would make. I think the only other person that I would see coming close to a move like a style like this and a vibe like this might be Milos Forman. I think everybody else would be very much like putting their particular stamp on it, and it wouldn't be quite like this. And it wouldn't be nearly as fun.
Yeah, I could see that, because I mean, so Amadeus would be like the big Foreman movie, and that movie is kind of fun.
It is
in a lot of ways. So
I mean, I think like also The People versus Larry Flint he made in the 90s, and then a few years after this he makes Man in the Moon about Andy Kaufman, and he has like this kind of interesting, like I always think it's because he's Czech, and because he came from a place where like he was making films before he left for America, where it was becoming increasingly difficult to kind of celebrate or be an independent person, and to like have kind of full freedom of expression. And so I feel like once he gets to the United States, a lot of the movies that he makes are kind of celebrating people who were really able to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A lot of them are like movies that are either based on books or based on like real people. A lot of them are iconoclasts. So I could see him doing something kind of similarly effective with this, but it's, and maybe kind of having that sense of like delight and joy that you see in some of his earlier Czech films. But anyway, that's way off track. I would love to see the Milos Forman version of this movie. It would be a very different movie.
I mean, it would be, but I don't think it would be worse.
No, I don't think so either.
Just different.
Think it would just be different.
Yeah, but I love that opening titles. It's kind of like a callback to opening titles like North by Northwest and Charade and those sorts of movies. So
I love that you brought up Charade. Charade's great.
Yeah.
And was that a Mancini score? I can't remember, but
I don't know.
But similar vibe. So
I wish I had like all that information filed away where I could be like, yes, but I do not.
Yeah, I'm not fully a human IMDb at this point, but
yeah, not yet. But yeah, so one of the things about this movie that you wouldn't necessarily think about watching it, but like once you know it, you're like, oh, okay, this makes sense. Is that this was a super fast paced shoot.
Sure.
There was a 52-day shoot, which is not very long.
No, not at all.
And there's a lot of movie. Spielberg talks about he's never worked faster his whole career than he did in this movie. They filmed in 147 different locations.
Wow. And 52 days. Like that's
in 52 days.
Oh.
So at times he said they were like, they would film in 3 locations in one day on
that's
certain
exhausting.
days.
Like in 3 different like cities or 3 different locations in a single place.
No. So, I mean, they did stuff in New York. So, so when you say like locations, so like in New York, you have like the apartment is a location.
Gotcha. Okay.
Chase Bank
like
is a location. JFK is a location.
Still, it's like you're going between like different spots and you're losing time by doing that. That's a lot of setup. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. So they do that in New York. They film in Alcatraz in San Francisco. They film in other California locations. They're in Montreal for some shoots. They do the scenes that are in France and Quebec. So they're just all over the place in this movie. So
that's crazy.
So I think what comes across in that is one, like the pace that you feel in the movie I think is there because of the way they shot this movie. It's just everyone's in that like mindset
it's something that aids the film though. Like that momentum is something you want, which is good. Like I think it ultimately helps.
Because this movie would feel so like fragmented and even like if it didn't have that like go pace, then it would, that makes it feel like a chase. Like you want it to feel a bit like a chase, but like it's not really a chase if you really think about it. Like it's a guy sitting in an office wondering where this guy is, and maybe every once in a while having a lead. But the way the movie's shot and edited together, it makes it feel like it's constantly like in motion, which is really impressive, I think.
Absolutely.
Like it's just one of those things, like the pace of shooting and then on the way it's edited together is just something like a lot of people don't think about, is with that really like makes or breaks movies like this. And so big props. Michael Kahn is a great editor.
I mean, I was going to say like that's really a miracle of editing, is being able to make that feel consistent and not rushed. So that's great.
Yeah. So that, you just really feel that energy in the movie. So it was, when I read that, when I was reading about the movie and watching the behind the scenes, I was like, okay, that makes total sense. But Leo also had the flu for half the shooting.
Oh gosh, that's miserable.
So he is just like miserable for half the time.
So he actually looks and feels the way that Frank does when he gets picked up from. Use
Yeah,
it.
maybe that wasn't acting.
It might not have been.
Crawling down the prison hallway.
Oh, buddy. Oh,
Yeah, man. And he does look tired a lot in this movie, which is feels like it should be in character because he's always on the move.
For sure.
He should be tired, but he probably was in real life as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I really think also one of the things that Spielberg talks about is he was working, like he was thinking back on stuff he had learned from Frank Capra, like I guess looking into Frank Capra about like comedy, which is just like pushing actors like to speed up so that there's some improvisation that comes out of it, and they did that in a lot of, for one, like they're shooting so much, they're having to go so fast that he kind of like has to go like, okay, let's do another take. And he talked about how like a lot of Leo's takes that are in the movie was his last take, because he'd be like, okay, last take, throw caution to the wind, and then that's like the best take.
Nice.
And then Walken he talked about Walken, like every take was very, very different. So I guess that's kind of like Walken's acting style is, I'm going to do different every take and let them pick which one is best. And
I can see that.
There's like an anecdote they tell in the making of where like the scene in the like really nice restaurant where Walken like the Abagnale Senior kind of like starts breaking up and tearing up. That was just like after they shot that, Walken was like, I'm sorry, like I don't know, I was just kind of in the moment. I know that's not really what we were going for with this scene. And Spielberg was like, no, that's the one we're going to use. That was great.
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah.
So it's always fun to hear those kind of stories. But yeah, we've talked a little bit about the production design, but we should probably mention that Leo wore over 100 costumes in this movie.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yes. The costume, like the design team talked about like going through tons and tons of period magazines. And then on top of that, you have like throughout the movie, you have like 3,000 to 4,000 extras to costume as well.
That's exhausting.
Yeah. So they're just like, they said
it's a lot of stewardesses, like, man. That's
I mean, you have stewardesses, you have like, young adults at the Atlanta house. You have, I mean, it's just endless. You have all the doctors. An entire engagement
party full of debutantes. Yep. They're big sets.
Yeah. FBI sets. You have, it's a lot. And they really they had to like do a lot of repurposing of sets too, because I mean, you're shooting in JFK. So you have to like hide stuff that's modern and like put up stuff that's from the era. So because it's like so much location shooting, there's a lot of that too. So yeah, huge props to those guys.
I always think of just like the historical accuracy and continuity stuff like that. I mean, that is its own role in a production design department, and like the amount of research that goes into like what every little thing would have looked like. There was a guy who used to do I think he still does do like graphic design and production design on a number of different movies that came through KU and did a talk, and he had just worked on No Country for Old Men, and that was like the first time I was in college, and it was the first time that I'd really heard about like what that looks like on a set, and it was the first time I'd ever really thought about like the amount of attention to detail that has to go into some forms of production design, of just like even down to like a bubblegum wrapper, just like what would that have looked like, how do you create that, how do you make it look both like of the time and also like old at the same time. It's a lot of thought.
Even like they have you end up with a lot of consultants. Like they had a FBI consultant to help with all the FBI stuff, and that guy kind of talks about how like he was in the FBI at this time, and so the FBI scenes, he's like, it felt like being transported back to that era, like being on those sets. Which is cool to hear. He's authenticating like the way they looked, the way they talked, like the set, the way the FBI workroom looked, So there is so much detail in all that.
Yeah. Which I mean, also just the way that you see Frank perfectly replicating those checks, right? Like, I feel like that's not a dissimilar kind of a job, right? Like, you're making sure the logo looks right, that the wear on the paper is correct. Like, it's its own kind of form of forgery.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, we should probably talk about, let's kind of skip down, you know, before I have to let you go for this episode. And let's talk a little bit about like just things we really loved in this movie.
Sure.
Because I love to talk about like scenes and images that like were intriguing or like interesting. And I think that's one of them is just, though every time it's like, this is like Spielberg at his best as far as like insert shots go of like, this is what's happening. I'm going to give you some like quick insert shots and you can put all the pieces together of what he's doing. Like when he's taking the labels off the little plastic planes and
which is that was an image that stuck with me. I think from the first time that I watched it, like, again, not having watched it for years until I watched it to prepare for the podcast. And that was the one image that I remember.
Yeah.
Just like stuck in my brain.
Yeah. Well, it's a great image because, you know, he's doing the first one and it works.
Yeah.
And then it does another series of insert shots where it's like a bunch of planes in the tub and a bunch of checks laying on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, he's really going after it, you know?
Yeah.
And that's just that's like such efficient filmmaking of just like, I'm going to show you what he's doing and I'm going to cover like months and months of his life just with this sequence of images.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I wonder, this is just a completely random thing, but I'm a huge, I mean, now that you've read my book, you know, too, I'm a Paddington super fan. And so like one of the interesting things in the first movie is that like, you see Paddington in the boat and he's got his little jar of marmalade and he licks it out. And then by the time he gets to London, you see like just piles and piles of empty jars of marmalade. And you're like, oh, it's been a while. It's been a few months. I just, it's a similar showing of like the passage of time. I wonder if that was, I don't know, similar inspirations. Cause I know those movies pull from like all kinds of other movies, like all the time.
Yes.
So anyway, just a thought.
Yeah. I love like Paddington, when Paddington calls like back to Mission Impossible.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah.
Oh man. I'm kind of upset. I know there's a bunny trail, but I am upset that we're not getting my mind is blank, the same director for this new
Paul
one.
King isn't coming back for the third one. I know.
Yeah.
It's the vibes look like they'll be similar enough, but I don't know if the filmmaking will be quite as like high quality without you realizing that it's really high quality, which is the thing that I really love about his work.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I love those movies. They're so good. What were some like really, other than that, like sequences or images maybe that stood out when you watched this time?
Gosh, I think one thing that really stuck out to me, I think maybe because I just kept thinking about this in conversation with the Fabelmans, is like when he comes back to visit his mom briefly, like he kind of breaks away from Carl and he goes to see his mom and she's married and they have a kid. And that kid has no idea who he is. And it's at Christmas, I think, because like there's a Christmas tree in the house. And I feel like that house looks fairly similar to the house that's supposed to be like his childhood house at the beginning of that movie, at the beginning of the Fabelmans, rather. And I think maybe it kind of strikes a similar thing of like being on the outside and looking in and wanting to have what somebody else has. That's a weird kind of one-off image that just kind of, it's a very small scene, but it really hit me interestingly this time out.
Yeah, we should probably ask the question, like, is this a Christmas movie? Because it's...
I think it is in some ways,
It is, yeah. Well, what's interesting, so there's this book, I don't know if, now that I'm thinking about it, I can't remember, because I wrote these notes a while back. I don't remember if this is a book or an article, but it's written by Alan Vanneman called Steven Spielberg, A Jew in America, Deconstructing Catch Me If You Can. And he interprets the film as like an allegory of Jewish identity in America, which is interesting. Living on the fringes of society, changing your identity to escape social determinism, chasing success. And as along the lines of what we're talking about, integrating into WASP family model.
Sure. Yeah.
And the Christmas references are a big part of that. And that's a big part of Spielberg's childhood of like, he really like had a hard time being Jewish growing up. And one of the manifestations of that is like wanting to do Christmas and not being able to do Christmas growing up, and all his friends getting to do Christmas and have Christmas trees and do presents and all that. And so like, you can definitely see that like all through this movie. So yeah, I think it's an interesting interpretation.
Yeah, I think it's it's an interesting. Maybe it's a Christmas movie for people who don't like Christmas, or for people who have like a very contentious relationship with Christmas. I think I could see that.
Well, like as far as Spielberg goes, it's almost like you were saying, it's this outside looking in. Like, I want that, but it's not. But I can't have it sort of feeling.
And I think it's it's not the same thing, but it's still kind of chasing a version of normalcy or perceived normalcy that isn't yours. And I think the thing that makes it doubly frustrating for Frank in that moment is that it's from somebody who he knows and loves, and who has been able to find that, but without him.
Yes.
So that's another part of what makes that scene so heartbreaking.
Yeah. And I mean, there's almost like endless parallels to Spielberg's life with this movie.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a lot.
The mom leaving for the friend, living kind of like the escapist fantasy version of a life. Like that's, Spielberg like finds that in making movies, and Abagnale found that in like being a con man. But
yeah. And I think there's something in there too of like not really knowing your own identity. I think Frank doesn't know his own identity. He's trying to construct one. And it's all of it is based on what he thinks other people would want him to be or to appear like. So like he's very good at appearing to be what other people want him to be in that moment, like starting from like the moment where he pretends to be the substitute teacher in class. Just because it's like his first day at a new school and he doesn't want to like stand out, and he doesn't like all the other kids, so he's just like, whatever, I'm just going to take control of the classroom and make them like me.
Yes. And it's almost like you almost wonder if like Spielberg is like feels like a con man himself, of like,
sure,
I'm making these movies to express these things about like how I feel and who I am, and like, and even the degree of like, kind of like changing with the whims of what the people want from you, and like, in the movies he makes, Spielberg can't do serious adult dramas, and so he's like,
exactly,
this is what people want from me. I need to try to do this. For them.
And I feel like he's in kind of an interesting transitional moment in his career at this point, and this is like, as well, it's not the first time, but because I think we have like his big serious dramas that are like Saving Private Ryan and Schindler's List, and Amistad up to this point. But this one strikes this interesting balance between kind of whimsy and like adulthood, like a certain maturity that I think kind of come to characterize a lot of his later films. And this is kind of like an early indicator of what that's gonna look like moving forward. Because I'm trying to remember, is War of the Worlds after this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's sort of the last of his like, Tom Cruise sci-fi movies, and then we have The Terminal.
Yeah, it's
kind of in close conversation with this too.
Yeah, The Terminal's right after this for Spielberg, and then War of the Worlds.
Because then I think the only thing that kind of throws me off a little bit is Ready Player One, and that kind of is something that is very much like playing on nostalgia for the kinds of movies that he made much earlier in his career.
But that comes after a string of like Lincoln, Bridge of Spies, Munich,
exactly.
The Post. I mean, you have the BFG in there, but that's like a little bit of an outlier.
That's true.
So.
I feel like The Post is like tone wise, maybe in closer conversation with this movie a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Just in terms of it being both like, kind of serious minded, like having serious things to say, but also having a really good time saying them.
Yeah.
It's that's the kind of vibe that I associate more with his later work. Although I know like there's also like plenty of stuff that he switches in between along the way.
Yeah.
When he's at his best, these days, that's the kind of thing that I gravitate toward.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because like there up to this point, he still was like there was like still a lot of contention about him between different views of him with critics that, had followed him through his career up to this point. And it seemed like from my research, this was one where this was like finally the one you would think it would be, Schindler's List or Saving Private Ryan, but there's still like contention about even those. And it seems like this is the one where finally like everyone was kind of like, okay, yeah, that's a good movie,
Yeah. I think it strikes a balance between like what we're used to seeing from him and what I think critics wanted to see from him in a really interesting way that I think he keeps trying to work on. And I mean, I know this is kind of a little bit of a rabbit trail. I feel like this is kind of informed, this and The Terminal and a few of his other movies are really informed by his relationship with Robert Zemeckis in a big way.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of the idea of like the American dream and interrogating like whether or not it works, and just like mounds and mounds of nostalgia for like the stuff that was around when you were growing up. I feel like that all kind of exists in conversation with each other in a way that I think you see in Zemeckis' movies too.
Yeah, absolutely. And real like, I really think like you're nailing just like why it worked. I wrote down this quote from Andrew Sarris in The Observer at the time, and he said of this movie, quote, "That rarity of rarities, a mainstream American feel-good movie with both charm and intelligence." So it's you're on par with Andrew Sarris, so that's pretty good. It's a good take if you're on par with him.
That's a massive compliment you just gave me. Thank you.
I mean, you had the same takeaway as Andrew Sarris, so you're doing something right.
Yes, wonderful. I will take that any day of the week.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great critic, so
for sure.
Man, any I guess before I have to let you go for this episode, I might hit some other points solo, but what's maybe like a final takeaway from Catch Me If You Can? A lot of weight on this question.
Yeah, I think
no pressure.
Overall, I feel kind of silly for saying this because I know a lot of people really do like this movie. I just hadn't rewatched it in a really long time, and I think I liked it, but kind of wrote it off when I saw it. And watching it again made me, and even talking about it with you on this episode, made me really appreciate it in a much deeper way than I think I had really given it credit for at the time. So it's not lesser Spielberg. I don't know that there really is such a thing as lesser Spielberg, but like it exists on a higher.
There is.
Yeah,
I've seen them in this series.
I mean, like nobody ever talks about Always, but that's a nice movie. It's perfectly fine. I think Ready Player One. I like that's a movie that I forget he made. That I would call that lesser, but
I'll say this: 1941.
Oh, of course, yes, yeah,
is
sure,
horrible.
I've heard that, which is why I haven't seen it.
It's not funny. There are people that like it out there, and all the best to those people, but I don't know what's wrong with them because it was not funny.
I think even Spielberg himself talks about it not being a good movie. So, but I think it exists on a. It's
an anomaly.
This movie I'm willing to move up really significantly in my rankings. And
that's fair. Yeah.
It makes me want to kind of revisit that period of his career even more.
Yeah. I mean, so for me, it's like in that like middle tier of his movies, which is like, I don't know. Like you said, it's like, okay, middle tier Spielberg movies, like great. Like bring them on, I'll watch them several times but solid. I mean, solid, like for me, it's like a solid 7 out of 10, but in the right mood, I might give it like 8 out of 10 sort of movie, you know?
Sure. Yeah. I think
That's
that's
kind
a
of
good
how I
assessment.
feel about it. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like a fun watch. It's not like super deep. It doesn't get super deep into stuff like Minority Report and AI that came right before this, I think like have a ton of ideas that are really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's like more my thing. So I'm going to like those more, but like just throw a movie on and it's a really great watch and interesting, both like visually and emotionally, like, and great storytelling. Like that's what this movie is. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, like I mentioned before, I think it also makes me want to rewatch Fablemans a little bit more and to kind of re-engage with it that way. I think those are the two of them are movies that really play on each other in ways that I hadn't really considered until now. So yeah.
And honestly, like several of his movies would play well with the Fablemans,
of
but
course, yeah,
this
absolutely.
one probably like in tone and some of the themes probably like would be one of the higher ones to pair with it for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks a ton for talking about this movie with me. Had a great time. And we'll have you back on to talk about films for all seasons.
Absolutely.
In an episode very soon. Usually I do them back to back, but just like with the way the release calendar is working out with,
totally get it.
I mean, the Oscars, you got to talk about the Oscars on
of
Oscar
course,
weekend,
you can't not. I get it completely. You're catching me like right after the Golden Globes, which I still watched mostly because it was snowing, but I had a great time. So yes, I get it.
I did not watch them, but I did keep up with who was winning.
We're in the full
the
award season swing. So yeah.
Yes. But yeah, thanks for coming on, and looking forward to that future conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Hello there, listener. Don't you ever want more for your life? Don't you ever dream of surpassing the status of just podcast listener? Well, I've got good news. If you head on over to establishingshotpod.com and click the send a voicemail button on the right side of your screen, you can be featured on the podcast. I'd love to hear from you, whether it's a comment in response to an episode you liked, an opinion of mine you disagreed with, or just a question for me. And if you're too shy to have your voice featured, you can always email me at establishingshotpod@gmail.com. Don't settle for just being a podcast listener. Reach for the stars and get featured on The Establishing Shot. Back to the show.
I really enjoyed having Abby on. I wanted to make sure that I hit a couple more interesting things about the movie as well. So I'm just going to jump right back into that. We talked about those opening credits. I did want to give credit where credit's due. It was made by this French duo, Florence Degas and Olivier Kuntzel. Man, they did such a great job with that. So I wanted to give them a shout out. But yeah, this movie, I didn't mention before, was shot from February 11th to May 4th, 2002. So that's that 52-day shoot that we talked about. And man, they were working with a $52 million budget, and they took that so far with this movie because it feels so big. And we mentioned like all the different locations, and that kind of adds to like the adventurous feel of the movie to me, and also just makes it feel so expansive and big. And yeah, it really, really goes a long way. So a couple of production things that I thought were interesting. We didn't talk a ton about the cinematography. We talked a little bit about it. Kaminsky does, I think, a really good job with this. He's such I feel like he's a very versatile cinematographer. His stuff doesn't always work for me. Minority Report was very like strange to me. The washed out colors and brightness of it were strange to me. I still really, really, really liked that movie. It didn't like turn me off, but But this is kind of the opposite of that. It's like very colorful. It's visually like pretty simple. He's not like overdoing a whole lot. But yeah, you see all the colors. So like, yeah, I guess like you could contrast this with Saving Private Ryan, where they like desaturated everything in both like while filming and in post. And in this one, like they want to make sure you feel all the idealistic 60s colors. He even I read that Kaminsky even paved had the paved streets like constantly sprayed with water to kind of improve like the reflection and add like this luster to all the images. And like, especially like to contrast that with like the very austere interiors of the FBI offices. So I think that worked really well. We talked a good bit about the production design, some other really fun things about that. They did purposely design the movie to start off a little bit more drab and monochromatic. And if you pay attention, you'll see it gets more and more colorful as he gets more and more into his schemes, which is fun if you pay attention to that. And yeah, it's just, we talked about all the detail. One of the things I didn't mention while I was talking with Abby is that there were 100 to 150 different IDs and documents made for this movie. So much attention to detail. Very, very cool. And then one more thing along the production lines, the music. So you have the score. We talked about the John Williams score, but you also have a bit of a soundtrack with this movie, and they used period top 40 tracks throughout. So you have like Nat King Cole's The Christmas Song, Dusty Springfield's The Look of Love. You have Judy Garland's Embraceable You and Frank Sinatra's Come Fly With Me. So they were really like hitting those period top 40 tracks, which I think really is another like just fun feature of the movie that you get. But yeah, the movie came out on May 31st of 2002. And what's crazy is, no, sorry. The movie did not come out then. The movie came out Christmas 2002. But back in May 2002, really right after they're finishing, they wrap this up. And then at the end of May, Spielberg gets a degree in film and electronic arts from California State University. He was 56 years old, and I guess he had always wanted to kind of like actually get a degree and do some more studying of film. And so he finished shooting this movie and then finishes a degree in film and electronic arts. So that's kind of a cool little thing that Spielberg did. And then later in the year, sorry, I got my dates mixed up. It releases on Christmas Day, 2002. This is 5 days after Gangs of New York, which is very interesting. We talked about that. I couldn't remember earlier, but I have it here in my notes, luckily, that 5 days after Gangs of New York. So you have Leo on December 20th and then December 25th with these big movies. And yeah, I think this ends up really overshadowing Gangs of New York, which I think is kind of an underrated Scorsese. I think it's very good. But yes, this definitely overshadowed it in the box office, where it made $352 million worldwide. It opened at number 2 with $48 million as opening weekend. It was number 2 to Lord of the Rings to the Two Towers, but that kind of makes sense. We talked a little bit about the critical reception. This there were people that thought it was just a frivolous palate cleanser between more important stuff, but those were few and far between. Most critics really thought this was just a solid movie, and I think they're right. I think it is just a really good, solid movie. It did get some Oscar nominations. It got nominated for supporting actor for Christopher Walken, which I think is really good. We talked about how Walken really kind of does a lot with a little in this movie. And then John Williams for the original score, which I think is very deserving. I love, love, love the score in this movie. It's kind of going the doo-doo in my head right now. But yeah. And it actually led to a Broadway musical comedy 9 years later. Fun fact, I had no idea about that. A little bit more about the movie. So the real Frank, a little bit about him. $2.5 million in bad checks in 26 countries and all 50 states before his 22nd birthday. Crazy. He served time in France and Sweden before he returned to the U.S. And it was at age 26 that he started to work with the FBI on parole. They kind of do some title cards at the end talking about how he's developed many of the security features in documents used around the world, which is true. And he said the most amazing thing he's ever done is to take his past and turn it into what he has done today, which I think is cool. It's him kind of thinking like those are really fun, but the most amazing thing is that like I've actually like made a difference now. Like I changed and made a difference. That's the more amazing thing, which I think is a cool, like endearing takeaway that is probably true. Yeah. I think so I do need to hit some Spielberg distinctions. That is a big thing that I always love to talk about. And this has got basically all of them. All of the Spielberg distinctives. Is a very, very Spielberg movie. It's got low angle close-ups, which is like, I think at this point is the Spielberg distinctive shot is the low angle close-up. He really is hitting on his great sense of space and geography. And you always have like a pretty good sense of where you are and when you are, based on just his use of space, his use of like character details. So you never jump from a past event to like him in the present and wonder where you are. You always have a good sense of that. A lot of use of reflections and silhouettes in this movie. And then two, just like big Spielberg things, incredibly efficient character building in this movie. And then just like great use of tension. Some other like great scenes and images that I wanted to point out. I loved when they pan to his face the first time he flies. Like you're like, oh, this is the first time he's ever flown, and he's freaked out. That kind of stuck out to me. I love all the phone calls and the quotes you get in those too. Like you only know what people tell you, and then Hanratty calling him out for not having anyone else to call. Another laugh out loud line is how Amy Adams delivers the line, "You're not a Lutheran." I love that. And then one of the things that I was like, "Ooh, that's reminds me of AI," is when Abagnale is being driven away in the French police car, and he's like looking out the rearview mirror. It kind of reminds me, not out of the rearview mirror, but out of the back windshield. It reminded me of the kid in AI, like being seen in the rearview mirror when the mom is driving away. I don't know, it's kind of like image wise, those felt like kind of cousins. And then, just loved all that. I did want to touch a little bit on the character kind of juxtaposition of Abagnale and Hanratty. Really interesting when you like think about them in juxtaposition to each other. So you have like a heady pace versus like an inertia character. You have feigned indifference and conservative rigidity. you kind of have two sides of America with the playboy versus like J. Edgar Hoover type. And yeah, so you have like they're kind of juxtaposed against each other, but then they end up having this commonality. There are these two long figures that are united through family trauma. And then you end up kind of with this surrogate father, surrogate son deal towards the end, which I think is really cool. Molly Haskell commented on that. She said, it goes without saying that Frank will occasionally try to run and Carl will always bring him back. From here on, they are chained together like two halves of the same man, which indeed they are. The hopelessly yearning child in Spielberg and the earnestly mature man of integrity. So that's from Molly Haskell's biography of Spielberg. Yeah, I love that quote. That kind of sums up that kind of juxtaposition. Like they're different but the same in a way. And theme wise, we talked a lot about kind of the different things going on in this movie. It's like, it's not a deep movie, but there is like emotional resonance to be found for sure in this. And yeah, it's one of the Spielberg parallels that we didn't exactly hit was the fear of being an imposter. And there has to be some degree to which, like, when you have as much success as Spielberg, there's this like, there had to be a feeling of like, this is outrageous to him at times. Like, what do I do? Like, how can I be this successful? Is it really like, am I really doing this? And you definitely get that feeling in the Frank Abagnale Jr. character in this movie. So yeah, that's a feeling shared, that imposter syndrome felt by many like very successful high achievers. So, and then another thing that we didn't really talk about earlier is that this movie is like very fast paced and energetic and fun, but there's like this undertone of melancholy through the movie, like this longing for what you don't have. I guess Abby did mention that, so I should give credit where credit is due. She did mention that, but we didn't like expound on it. And I just wanted to point that out again. There is this like I think it comes with what we talked about of Spielberg, just like being very mature and exploring this like this fun material in a fun way, but also like with the intelligence to like know how to keep that undertone of like sadness there. And you can feel it even if you're having a good time there kind of underneath it all. So, yeah. And I guess one of the scenes that I didn't mention earlier that really sticks out is when he's with the Amy Adams character. I can't think of her name in this moment, but he's sitting with her family on the couch and they start singing along with the TV. And, it's like he's finally finding what he doesn't have but needs. It's after that like he calls Frank and tries to get a truce. And you kind of get like a little bit of Spielberg parallel there too, of like he with Kate Capshaw, he finally found like the family he was looking for, and they have a bunch of kids and adopted kids, and it's like he's kind of created this like what he's always needed but didn't have. He finally has it now, and so you kind of see that there. But really fun movie. Really enjoyed watching it, and it was fun talking with Abby about it. Just kind of as a final thought, Spielberg says this movie reminds him that you can turn your life 180 degrees and make something better of yourself. And I mentioned Frank Abagnale Jr. The real Frank Abagnale Jr. said that about his life. That was the most important thing he did, was do a 180 and make something of his life. Spielberg himself has done this on multiple occasions in his career, kind of reinventing who he is, both in his professional life with the movies he makes and also in his personal life, as I was just talking about. And I really appreciate that. And I think that here with this movie, he's finally gaining the due credibility as an artist among the critics. So love that. I already talked about, what I would rate this and where I would put this in Spielberg's filmography. And I just think it's just super, super solid movie. But yeah, that's really all I have for this week. Next week, I am going to be talking about Oscar predictions and my favorite movies of 2024. Probably talk about some performances, some cinematography, all that fun stuff. So be looking forward to that next week. That'll come out the Friday before the Oscars. So hopefully you get to listen to that and hear my predictions before watching the show. But yeah, that's, and then in the next couple weeks after that, I have an interview with Abby that I mentioned earlier about her book, Films for All Seasons. That'll be, upcoming. And also we'll be covering The Terminal, which would be the next movie, also Tom Hanks. So be looking forward to those 2 episodes as well. I didn't ask Abby to share this earlier before she signed off, but you can find her on Blue Sky, is where she mostly is, at Abby Olcese. That's ABBYOLCESE. And she said she's also occasionally on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And it's the same handle. So, and I'll link those in the episode description so you can find her. I'll link her book. And yeah, be looking forward to that episode where I interview her about her book. It's really great, really interesting. And so, yeah, be looking for that. But that's all we have for this week. So I've been Eli Price for Abby Olcese. You've been listening to The Establishing Shot. We'll see you next time.
We were happy here. For a little while.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.